Welcome to the Midnight Audiobook Club, your cozy late-night sanctuary for the world's greatest literature. Before we dive into tonight's extraordinary tale, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and click the notification bell. Your support helps us keep the night alive with stories, and you won't miss any of our upcoming midnight journeys. Tonight, we are going somewhere very far away. We are traveling to Russia, small village in the 1880s, to a world of dirt roads and wooden churches and two old men who once made a promise to each other, and where one of them changed his mind partway through. But first, the man who wrote their story, his name was Leo Tolstoy. By any measure, he had everything. Born into Russian aristocracy in 1828, he inherited a vast estate, a brilliant mind, and a life of extraordinary privilege. By 50, he had written War and Peace and Anna Karenina, two of the greatest novels ever put on paper. The world knew his name. Critics compared him to Shakespeare, and then, at the height of all of it, he woke up one morning and felt that none of it meant anything at all. He described this crisis later in a memoir called A Confession. Every morning, every evening, the same question: why? What is the point? What am I doing this for? And no answer came, not from philosophy, not from science, not from any of the books that lined his walls. Then he started talking to the peasants who worked his land. They were uneducated, poor, and largely illiterate. They planted in spring, harvested in autumn, survived winter, and went to church. And they were not afraid, not of poverty, not of old age, not of death. They faced everything that terrified Tolstoy with a calmness he simply did not possess. He wanted to know why. The answer, as he gradually understood it, they had something to live for, not fame, not money. They lived for each other, for small daily acts of kindness and labor and faith that, strung together, made a life that meant something. This discovery changed him permanently. He began dressing like a peasant, working in the fields, giving away enormous sums of money. He stopped writing grand novels and began writing short stories, simple moral stories that could be read aloud in a single evening. Stories like the one you are about to hear. The kingdom of God is within you. Luke chapter 17, verse 21. The epigraph Tolstoy placed at the beginning of Two Old Men. It is a story about a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. But underneath that, it is a story about what it means to be a good person. About the difference between performing goodness and simply being good. About where God actually dwells. No grand drama, no war, no romance. Just two old Russian peasants walking a very long road and making different choices along the way. And somewhere in those choices, one of the largest questions a story can ask: what does it mean to do the right thing? Close your eyes. Let the world outside fall away. It is an autumn evening in Russia, many years ago. Two old men are sitting together, talking about Jerusalem. Here is Leo Tolstoy's Two Old Men. Chapter 1. Two old men make a vow. Two old men made up their minds to go to Jerusalem. The first was Efim Tarasich Shevlov, a well-off peasant, sober and serious, the kind of man his neighbors trusted absolutely. He had served twice as village elder, never drank, never swore, and kept his accounts in perfect order. His farm was well run, his house was solid, and his life was orderly in the way that gave him deep satisfaction. The second was Elisha Bodroff, neither rich nor poor, a former traveling carpenter, short and round with a curly grey beard and a permanent air of mild amusement. He is a beekeeper who keeps several hives. He liked conversation. He was the kind of man who always seemed to be enjoying himself, even when there was nothing in particular to enjoy. These two men were neighbors and old friends. They had known each other all their lives, which is to say, completely. The idea of Jerusalem had been in both their minds for years, the kind of idea that lives quietly at the back of a devout man's thoughts, pushed aside by seasons and harvests and grandchildren, but never quite gone. One autumn evening, Efim said it out loud. "Elisha, it is time we went to Jerusalem." "I've been thinking the same thing," said Elisha, "for a long time." "We're not getting younger," said Efim. "No," agreed Elisha. "We're certainly not. After the spring planting, then." "After the spring planting," said Elisha. And just like that, the decision was made. They shook hands on it. They would walk, as pilgrims had always walked, carrying what they needed and trusting the road to provide the rest. Elisha went home that night with the lightness of a man who has finally done something he should have done years ago. His wife, when he told her, said only, "That is very far." "It is," said Elisha. "That's rather the point." The winter passed. Two old men in two neighboring houses went about their daily work and thought, now and then, of Jerusalem. Chapter 2. The morning of departure. Spring came. The planting was done. There were no more reasons to wait. Efim's household found some anyway. His older son arrived with a concern about a disputed strip of land, a legal matter that could become serious if left unaddressed. "Father, you can't leave this hanging. I will be back by autumn," said Efim. "It can wait." "But father, it will wait," said Efim. Elisha's preparations were simpler. New boots, good strong ones, because the road to Jerusalem was long. A change of linen, a coat. A small amount of money sewn into the lining of his belt. His walking staff, worn smooth from years of carpentry. His wife packed bread and dried fish and salt for the first stretch of road, she said. "Come back safely. And don't give your money away to every beggar you meet." "I'll try," said Elisha, which was not quite the same as promising. She knew this. She watched him go anyway. They left on a Tuesday morning, early, before the village was properly awake. The priest had blessed them. Their neighbors had wished them well. Now, in the cool grey of early morning, they walked out of the village and turned their faces south. The road stretched ahead, unpaved, gleaming with dew, bordered by fields green with new growth, birds loud in the hedgerows, the air full of earth, the new leaves and the freshness that only belongs to early morning in early summer. Elisha breathed it in and smiled. "Well," he said. "Well," agreed Efim, and they walked. They fell easily into rhythm. Efim set the pace, steady, purposeful, praying under his breath as he walked. measuring his steps to the rhythm of familiar words. Elisha kept up easily, looking around, noticing things, talking to everyone they met. Efim mostly said, and kept walking. In the evenings, they stopped at farmhouses and asked for shelter. Pilgrims on the road to Jerusalem were received with hospitality in those days, given food, a corner to sleep in, more conversation than they strictly needed. The first weeks passed easily. Good weather, sound boots, long flat Russian roads. 2 old men doing exactly what they had decided to do. They were happy in the quiet way of people living in accordance with their own intentions. Chapter 3. The road grows hard. For the first few 100 miles, the journey was generous. Peasants gave them lodging freely. The weather held. Elisha talked to everyone. Efim walked and prayed and kept his careful notebook. Every kopeck spent, every mile covered, everything in order. Then, as they moved south into a new province, something changed. The fields became thin and yellow. The farmhouses grew quieter. At one village, no one could offer them supper, not from unkindness, but from simple lack. The harvest failed last year, the householder said, spreading empty hands. What we had stored is gone. They went to the next house, the same, and the next. At the 4th house, a woman gave them a small piece of dark bread, the kind made from the very bottom of the flour barrel. As Elisha thanked her, he noticed her children watching from the doorway, with eyes that were very large and very quiet. He said nothing about this to Efim, but he thought about it for a long time as they walked. They learned, piece by piece, the shape of what had happened here: drought the previous summer, an early winter, stored grain gone by February, families who had sold everything, tools, furniture, livestock, and had nothing left. Some had sent their men to the cities and didn't know if they were coming back. Others had simply left, locking their doors and walking towards somewhere that might have food. The villages now felt hollow, like houses that still had walls, but had lost the life inside them. One evening they slept in a barn, and Elisha lay awake staring at the rafters. He was thinking about the woman who had given them her bread, about the children in the doorway, about the question that was forming itself slowly at the back of his mind, the question of what you do when you are on your way to somewhere holy and you pass through somewhere that needs you right now. He didn't say any of this to Efim, who was already asleep, breathing steadily, a man at peace with his plans. The next morning, the road curved through a small hamlet, just a handful of houses at the edge of a thin wood, most of them apparently empty. Then Elisha saw the hut, small, clay walls black with damp. A yard quiet in the wrong way, not the quiet of morning, but the quiet of a place where something has gone wrong and no one has the strength to fix it. A man lay in the yard on his back, in the shade, so still that for a moment Elisha thought he was dead. But as they drew closer, the man turned his head. His face was thin, so thin that Elisha could see the shape of his skull beneath the skin. Elisha stopped walking. Efim, a few steps ahead, looked back. "Come," said Efim. "We have distance to cover before noon." Elisha looked at the man. He looked at the hut. He looked back at Efim. "Just a moment," he said. I want to ask for a drink of water. Efim sighed, small, patient, and stopped to wait. Elisha went into the yard. He asked for water. The man looked at him for a long moment, then slowly shook his head and gestured toward the door of the hut. "Go and see," he said. Elisha pushed open the door. The smell reached him first. The closed, sour smell of sickness and hunger. On a mat on the floor, a young woman lay very still. An old woman sat hunched by the cold stove, her head in her hands. In the corner, a child of 7 or 8 was crying, not loudly, but with the low, persistent sound of a child who has lost faith that crying will help, but cannot stop. Elisha stood in the doorway. From the road, Efim called, "Elisha, we should go." Elisha did not go. Something was beginning here, the kind of choice that doesn't feel like a choice until long after it has been made. Elisha stood in the doorway of that hut and looked at what was inside it and did not go. Chapter 4. What Elisha found inside. The hut had one room. The stove was cold, not recently cold, cold in the way of something unlit for days. The shelves were bare. A single clay pot held nothing but dried grain dust at the bottom. On a mat on the floor, a young woman lay on her back, eyes open but unfocused. Beside her, a baby made a small, thin sound, not quite crying, the sound of a creature that has learned crying does not bring help. On the bench by the cold stove, an old woman sat with her head in her hands, rocking slightly. And in the corner, a boy of about 8 watched Elisha with enormous dark eyes, completely dry. He had used up his tears some time ago. "Good people," said Elisha gently, "God's peace to this house." "There is no peace here," said the old woman, not bitterly, just as a fact. He crouched beside the young woman. Her lips were cracked. Her breathing was shallow, the breathing of someone whose body is working very hard on very little. "How long?" he asked. 3 days since the last bread," said the old woman. "The baby has had nothing since yesterday. Her milk is gone. My son went to find work in the city. He sent money once. Then, nothing." Elisha looked at the boy in the corner. "What is your name?" A long pause. "Seriosha." "Seriosha. Is there any water?" "In the bucket." "But not much." Elisha brought the water to the young woman and helped her drink. Then he went to the door. Efim was on the road, pack on his back, the expression of a man approaching the end of his patience. "Elisha, we should move." "Efim. These people are dying." Efim looked at the hut. He looked back at Elisha. "There are many people in difficulty in this region. We cannot help everyone." "No, but we can help these ones. They are right here." A silence between them, holding years of friendship and now a genuine disagreement. "I'm going to stay for a little while," said Elisha. "You go ahead. I'll catch up." Efim looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned back to the road and walked on. Elisha watched him go. Then he went back inside the hut. Chapter 5. The work of one day. Elisha took off his pack and set it down. He broke the bread his wife had packed and gave pieces to the old woman and the boy, then helped the young woman eat slowly with sips of water between each bite. The baby he could do less for immediately, but he knew that if the mother ate and drank, the milk might return. The body, given the smallest foothold, will fight. Then he looked around the hut with a carpenter's eye, assessing what needed to be done in what order. The stove needed lighting. The water bucket needed filling. The young woman needed to be moved off the cold floor. He rolled up his sleeves and began. He found firewood in the lean-to and got the fire lit. The room began to change, shadows softening, the smell of damp replaced by wood smoke. He filled the water bucket from the well, the boy Seriosha trotting alongside him with his own small bucket, having been promoted overnight from frightened child to assistant. "Where is the nearest market?" Elisha asked as they walked. "2 villages that way," said Seriosha. "And old Prochor has grain. He lives by the church." "Show me," said Elisha. Old Prochor had rye flour, millet, salt fish, and seed grain. Elisha bought all of it at a price he considered steep but paid without argument. Prochor watched him count out the money. "You're a pilgrim." "On your way to Jerusalem, I was," said Elisha. "Was? I seem to have made a stop." He was there all day. He made porridge. He swept the floor. He aired the bedding and mended the door hinge that had been letting in the cold. He moved the young woman onto the bench off the damp floor. By evening, she had color in her face. The baby had nursed, tentatively, for the first time in 2 days. The boy Seriosha was asleep on the bench, mouth slightly open, looking for the first time like a child simply sleeping, rather than a child surviving. Elisha sat by the stove and looked at all of this. He thought about Efim, somewhere ahead on the road, walking steadily south. He thought about Jerusalem, the golden light, the prayers rising toward the dome. He thought about these things, looked at the sleeping boy, and thought, "I am not going to catch up with Efim this week." He thought this clearly and without distress. Then he banked the fire and lay down on the floor and slept. Chapter 6. Elisha stays longer than he meant to. He had meant to stay for a day, but the second morning, the young woman could not yet stand. The baby was still fragile. The old woman's hands shook when she tried to hold things. He stayed a second day, then a third. He learned the family story. The young woman's name was Natasha. Her husband Ivan had left in early spring to find factory work in the city. He had sent money twice. The second time was 3 months ago. Then silence. "Has anyone gone to look for him?" Elisha asked. "Who would go?" said the old woman, Matrona, her name was. "I cannot walk so far. Natasha cannot leave the children." She looked at Seriosha, who was watching a pair of sparrows in the yard with recovered interest. The interest of a child whose world has expanded again, overnight, to its proper size. "Seriosha is 8, Matrona finished. That afternoon, Elisha walked back to Prochor's house and paid for 3 months of grain to be delivered monthly. He also left money for a letter to be sent to the factory district in the city, asking after Ivan. "You're spending a lot for people you just met," Prochor said. "They're not strangers anymore," said Elisha. "I've swept their floor." On the 4th day, he got as far as picking up his pack. Then Natasha asked, with the careful dignity of someone unused to asking, whether he might look at the lean-to roof before he left. The grain would rot if it got wet. He put down his pack and fixed the roof. On the 5th day, he turned over the kitchen garden with Seriosha's help, because if they were going to plant, they needed to plant soon. On the 8th evening, he counted his money. It was not enough to get to Jerusalem. Not safely, not with the proper dignity of a pilgrim who would not arrive destitute. He sat with this for a while. The fire crackled. The baby slept. Seriosha breathed slowly in the corner. Elisha folded the money back into his belt, said his prayers, and lay down. He thought not about Jerusalem, but about tomorrow. The garden needed watering, the gate post was loose, and he wanted to teach Seriosha to mend the harness on the old horse before he left. There were still things to do. He would leave when they were done. Chapter 7. The road home. He left on the morning of the 3rd week. By then the hut was a place where people lived and intended to go on living. The fire was lit each morning. The garden was planted. The horse had come home, thin but willing, and was stabled in the repaired lean-to. The gate post was solid. And a letter had come back from the city. Ivan was alive. He had been ill 2 months in a charity hospital, but was recovered now and saving money to come home by autumn. He was sorry. He sent his love. Natasha read the letter sitting by the window, the baby on her knee. She read it twice, folded it carefully, and put it inside her blouse, close to her heart. She did not cry. She was not a woman who cried easily, but her face held the expression of someone receiving news they had almost stopped believing would come. On his last evening, Matrona made porridge with butter, and they ate together around the table. Seriosha sat across from Elisha, watching him with the attention of a child memorizing something he doesn't want to forget. "Will you come back?" the boy asked. "I don't know," said Elisha honestly. "The world is large, and I'm not getting younger. But will you try?" "I'll try," said Elisha. After supper, Matrona brought out a pair of new felt boots she had been secretly making during his stay, working on them in the evenings while he thought she was sleeping. "For the road," she said. "Yours are worn through. I can't take these. You can. I have nothing else to give you, and I am not a woman who gives nothing." He took the boots. He left before Seriosha woke, deliberately, because the boy had the look of someone capable of following him for an unreasonable distance. Natasha stood in the yard with the baby. In the pale morning light, she looked like a woman who was going to be all right. "Tell him a carpenter came through," said Elisha. She smiled, a full, real smile, the first he had seen from her. It changed her face completely. He turned back to the road and walked north, not south, not toward Jerusalem. Home. He thought about Efim somewhere far ahead and felt certain Efim would reach Jerusalem. Efim was the kind of man who arrived at places he decided to arrive at. Elisha did not feel envious. He felt content. The particular contentment of a man who has done what was in front of him and is now walking home to breakfast. He looked down at Matrona's boots as he walked and felt something that was not quite sadness and not quite happiness, the feeling that comes when something is genuinely true. An old woman had made him boots. A boy had shown him where the well was. A family that had been dying was alive. He had not reached Jerusalem, Walking home in the early morning, he was not sure it mattered. His wife was in the yard when he came through the gate. She looked at his thinner face and his worn coat and the new boots. Then she looked behind him. "Where is Efim?" "Still going. He'll be in Jerusalem by now." "And you?" "I made a stop," said Elisha. "Your money, you gave it away." "Most of it." "To beggars." "To a family," said Elisha. "They weren't beggars. They were just in a difficult time." His wife looked at him for a long moment, conducting the internal negotiation of a woman adjusting what she expected to what she was looking at, which was her husband, home safe, wearing excellent new boots, regarding her with the mild, untroubled eyes of someone who cannot regret what he has done. She shook her head. "Come inside," she said. "There's porridge." Elisha followed her in and sat at his own table and ate his wife's porridge and looked out the window at his own yard. Meanwhile, far to the south, Efim Tarasich-Shevlov was walking steadily toward Jerusalem. He had no idea yet what he would find when he got there. Chapter 8. Efim walks on alone. While Elisha was fixing roofs and teaching a boy to mend harnesses, Efim Tarasich-Shevlov was walking south. He walked as he had always walked, steadily, at a pace he had calculated would cover the necessary distance in the necessary time. He was not unhappy. Efim was rarely unhappy. He kept his notebook. Every evening he recorded what he had spent and what remained and whether the day's distance had been satisfactory. Numbers did not shift around unexpectedly. Numbers stayed where you put them. He missed Elisha in his way. The road was quieter without him. He told himself Elisha would appear somewhere ahead, or at Odessa where they were to take the ship, or perhaps at Jerusalem itself. He thought this and believed it, and walked on. At Odessa, he boarded a ship for Jaffa. He had never been on a ship. He stood at the rail watching the land recede until it was nothing. Around him, pilgrims from all over Russia gripped their packs and their prayers. He watched them and thought about Elisha, who would have known every one of their names and the names of their villages, and probably their dogs. He almost smiled. From Jaffa, it was another journey by road, dry and stony, and white with heat, the air spiced with something he couldn't name. On the third day from Jaffa, they came over a rise, and Efim saw the city on the hill for the first time. He stopped walking. He stood at the top of that rise for a long time, longer than was strictly necessary, looking at the walls, the towers, the domes catching the afternoon sun. He had expected something large and definitive. What he felt was quieter than that, deeper. He was not certain how to name it. He took off his hat. He said a prayer. Then he put his hat back on and walked down the hill into the city. Chapter 9. Jerusalem. Jerusalem was not what Efim had expected. Holiness was there, unmistakably, in the ancient stones and the weight of accumulated prayer that pressed down from every wall and arch. But he had not expected the noise, the crowds, the sellers of candles and holy water and blessed earth calling out in a dozen languages. Pilgrims from every country in the world pressed together in narrow streets. A small, quick-eyed man attached himself to Efim within the hour. offering to be his guide for a fee that Efim considered excessive. They negotiated. Efim paid less than asked and more than he wanted to, and the guide led him through a maze of alleyways at a pace designed to make Efim feel he needed a guide. The church of the Holy Sepulchre rose before him, vast and dim and full of candle smoke and incense and prayers in languages he could not identify. He moved with the crowd, deeper and deeper, until he stood before the small chapel at the center of everything, the Epilogue, built over the place where Christ had been buried and from which he had risen. He queued for a long time. The line moved inch by inch, and then he was inside. Smaller than he had expected, stone walls worn smooth by centuries of hands. Above the tomb, 36 lamps burning, their flames perfectly still, the smell of hot wax and old stone and 2,000 years of prayer. Efim knelt at the tomb of Christ and said the prayers he had been meaning to say since that autumn evening when he and Elisha had made their vow. He said them slowly, carefully, the way he did everything. He prayed for his family, for his village, for the dead whose names he had promised to remember, and briefly for Elisha, who had not come, but who perhaps had not needed to. On the second day, standing near the back of a large service, he looked toward the front of the church and saw, near the entrance to the Epilogue, a man he recognized. He was certain of it for only a moment before the crowd shifted. But in that moment, the grey coat, the round bald head, the posture, Elisha's posture exactly, arms slightly raised, face turned upward. Efim pushed forward. But when he reached the spot, there was no one there who resembled Elisha, only strangers. He stood still for a moment. Then he thought, the light in here is strange. He had been traveling for months. He was tired. He went back to his prayers. Chapter 10. The Vision at the Holy Sepulchre. On the third day, Efim went to the church again. He arrived early, before the great crowds. The church was dim and almost peaceful, just the lamps burning above the tomb, and the first pilgrims of the day moving quietly through the space. He said his morning prayers. He looked toward the Epilogue. And then again, he saw him. This time, there was no mistaking it, no confusion of crowds, no trick of uncertain light. Elisha was standing in the holiest place itself, at the entrance to the Epilogue, in the sight of everyone, his grey coat, his round bald head, shining, not in the way that skin catches light, but with a light that seemed to come from within. His arms were raised and spread, his face lifted upward, his expression one that Efim had never seen on any living face, complete, transparent joy, beyond what human expressions usually hold. Efim pushed forward through the crowd, gently, urgently, keeping his eyes on the grey coat and the shining head. He was almost close enough to touch him. The crowd shifted. When it settled, Elisha was gone. Efim stood in the holiest place in Christendom and looked at the empty space. He went out and stood by the church door until noon, watching every face that emerged, every pilgrim who filed into the Jerusalem sunlight. He looked at each one. No Elisha. He remained 6 weeks in Jerusalem. He went to Bethlehem, to Bethany, to the Jordan River. He had a new shirt sealed at the Holy Sepulchre. the shirt he would be buried in, and filled a bottle with Jordan water, and bought candles lit from the sacred flame, and in 8 places inscribed names to be prayed for. He spent all his money except just enough to get home. Through all of it, the image of Elisha, arms raised, face luminous, bald head shining, stayed with him like something burned onto the back of his eyes. On his last evening, Efim sat outside the inn and thought carefully about what he had seen. He was a practical man. He did not believe easily in visions. He believed in God the way a farmer believes in rain, as a real and necessary force, not a source of theatrical special effects. And yet, he had seen Elisha twice, clearly, in the holiest place in the world, with a light around him that had no physical explanation. It had looked like, he searched for the honest word, a rival. As though Elisha, who had stopped halfway through a province and never taken another step south, had somehow arrived here anyway. As though the road to Jerusalem was not the only road to Jerusalem. He put away his notebook. He said his prayers. He went to sleep. In the morning, he began the long road home. Chapter 11. Efim returns to the hut. The journey home was long and uneventful, the way return journeys often are. Efim walked it steadily and thought he had gone to Jerusalem, done everything correctly, lit the candles, filled the bottle, inscribed the names, said the prayers. He had fulfilled the vow. And Elisha, who had turned around halfway through a province he had barely entered, had appeared in the holiest place in the world with light around his head. He was working out what this meant. When he reached the province of the failed harvest, he recognized the landscape. He found the hamlet without difficulty. He had a good memory for roads. He stood at the gate and looked at the hut. It was the right place. He recognized the clay walls and the lean-to. But the lean-to had a new roof. The gate post was straight. The yard was swept. In the kitchen garden, something green and determined was growing above the turned earth. He knocked. A young woman opened the door, Natasha, with color in her face now and a fat, healthy baby on her hip, looking at Efim with cheerful, suspicious interest. "I passed through here some months ago," said Efim. "I am a pilgrim, just returned from Jerusalem. I had a traveling companion." He stopped here. Her face changed. "Come in," she said immediately. Inside, the stove was lit. Matrona sat at the table. Seriosha was practicing a knot with a piece of rope. And in the corner, a lean, tired-looking man in his 30s was mending a harness. Efim understood. He had come home. "He saved us," Natasha said simply. "We were dying. He came in and stayed 3 weeks and fixed everything. Then one morning he was gone. We never knew his name. He said he was a carpenter. His name is Elisha," said Efim. "Elisha Bodroff. He lives in my village." "Elisha," she repeated, as though learning the name of something she already knew by a different name. Seriosha looked up from his rope. "Is he well? Is he coming back?" "He is well," said Efim. "He said he would try." The boy nodded and went back to his rope. Apparently, this was enough. Efim stayed an hour, ate bread, drank tea, sat in the warmth of their stove. Then he picked up his pack and went out and walked north toward home. He walked quickly. He was eager, suddenly, to get there. Chapter 12. The Bees. He reached home on a bright afternoon early autumn. His village looked exactly as he had left it, which is how villages look when you have been away a long time and expected everything to be different. His family received him warmly, asked their questions, handled with reverence the things he had brought back: the Jordan water, the holy earth, the candles, the sealed burial shirt. He answered their questions. He ate. He sat by his own stove. But through all of it, at the back of his mind, was the thing he needed to do before any of it felt complete. He needed to see Elisha. The next morning he went, a short walk across the field, through the gap in the hedge, the path worn faint by a lifetime of neighborliness. As he came through the gap, he stopped. Elisha was in his yard, near the beehives under the birch trees. He was standing the way he had been standing in Jerusalem, arms slightly raised and spread, face turned upward, his bald head catching the morning light. Around him, his bees moved in their golden, purposeful circles. He wore no face net, no gloves. The bees landed on his arms and shoulders and moved through his beard, and he stood perfectly still among them, and they did not sting him. Above his head, the morning light came through the birch leaves in long golden shafts, the same quality of light that had been in the church of the Holy Sepulchre when Efim had seen him there, the same shining head, the same raised arms. Efim stood at the edge of the yard and did not speak and did not move. After a moment, Elisha's wife came out and called to her husband. Elisha turned. He saw Efim. His face broke into its smile, round and warm and entirely pleased with whatever it found in front of it. He came toward Efim through his bees, picking one gently from his beard as he walked. "Good day, neighbor. Good day, dear friend. Did you get there safely?" "My feet walked there," said Efim. "And I have brought you some water from the Jordan River. You must come to my house for it." He paused. He looked at Elisha, at the bees still moving around him, at the light in the birch leaves, at the face of the man he had known all his life and was, he realized, still learning. "But whether the Lord accepted my efforts," Efim said quietly, "I cannot say." Elisha smiled. "Well," he said cheerfully, watching a bee fly from his sleeve, God knows what he accepts and what he doesn't. Come and have some tea," he added. "You can tell me about Jerusalem." Efim looked at him for a moment longer. Then he nodded, and the two old men walked together toward the house, through the birch trees and the bees and the long shafts of morning light. That is where Tolstoy leaves them, walking together, not toward Jerusalem. They are past that now, both of them in their different ways, just toward the house, toward tea, toward the ordinary morning of two old neighbors who have known each other all their lives. No explanation of the vision. No confirmation or denial of what Efim saw in the church. No declaration of which man was right or which path was better. Just two old men and the morning light and the sound of bees. Tolstoy ends the story with a verse from the Gospel of John. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. John chapter 4, verse 24. He does not explain why. The story has already done the explaining, not through argument, but through the simple accumulated weight of two old men walking a long road and making different choices and both, in the end, arriving somewhere. Elisha Bodroff, who never reached Jerusalem, who spent his pilgrim's money on grain and firewood and a family he had only just met, walks through his own birch trees in the morning light, and his bees do not sting him. And Efim Tarasich Shevlov, who walked every step of the road, who lit his candles at the right altars, and filled his bottle at the right river, and inscribed his names in all the right places, stands at the edge of his neighbor's yard and wonders, quietly, whether he did the more important thing. Let's sit with that for a moment. On the surface, this is a simple story, almost too simple. Two old men. A long road, a hut with a dying family in it, a vision in a church, two old men walking home together. Tolstoy wrote it in 1885, when he was 57 years old, in the middle of the great transformation of his life, when he had given up his grand novels and his aristocratic comforts and was trying, urgently, to understand what a good life actually looked like. Not in theory, not in philosophy, in practice, on an ordinary day, in an ordinary hut. This story is his answer. Notice what Tolstoy does not do. He does not say that Efim was wrong to go to Jerusalem. Efim's faith is real and sincere and never mocked. He is a good man, careful, honest, devoted. He fulfills his vow. He prays his prayers. He does exactly what he set out to do. And he does not say that Elisha was right not to go. Elisha never claims any virtue. He doesn't lecture anyone. He doesn't even seem to think very hard about his choice. He just sees what is in front of him and does what needs to be done and goes home. Tolstoy simply shows us both men. And then he shows us the vision, and he lets us draw our own conclusions. But there is something in the vision worth thinking about carefully. Efim sees Elisha at the Holy Sepulchre, in the holiest place in Christendom, in the sight of all men, arms raised, face luminous. And then he goes home and finds Elisha in his own yard, among his own bees, in exactly the same posture, surrounded by exactly the same quality of light. Tolstoy is telling us something very specific here. He is telling us that the light is the same light, that the holiness is the same holiness. That what Elisha found in that hut, the cold stove, the starving child, the thing that needed to be done, was not a detour from the sacred. It was the sacred, dressed in ordinary clothes, in an ordinary place, asking to be noticed by whoever happened to be walking past. There is something quietly autobiographical about this story. The more you know about Tolstoy's life, he was a man who had performed goodness spectacularly. Great novels, famous philanthropy, a public reputation for moral seriousness that made him one of the most celebrated figures in the world. And yet, in his 50s, he felt profoundly that none of it had been enough, that he had been doing the right things for the wrong reasons, or the wrong things beautifully, or something he could not quite name. What changed him, what he described again and again in his later writing, was not a grand religious experience. It was the peasants, the ordinary people doing ordinary things with no audience and no reputation, at stake, feeding their neighbors, working their land, taking in a stranger because that was simply what you did when a stranger needed taking in. Elisha is that. Elisha is what Tolstoy was trying to become. He died in 1910 at 82 years old, having spent the last decades of his life giving away money, working alongside peasants, and writing stories like this one. He died, famously, at a railway station, having left his estate and his family in the middle of the night to live simply among ordinary people. Whether he succeeded in becoming Elisha, only God knows. But he kept trying, right to the end. The two most powerful warriors are patience and time. Leo Tolstoy. Efim asks at the end whether the Lord accepted my efforts. He doesn't say, I know the Lord accepted my efforts. He doesn't say, my efforts were obviously more significant than Elisha's. He says, I cannot say. And Elisha, cheerful, unhurried, picking bees from his beard, says only, God knows. Not, I know. Not, I was right, and you were wrong. Just, God knows. There is something deeply restful about that answer. Something that doesn't require us to rank the two men or to judge their choices or to conclude that one path was holier than the other. It simply requires us to notice that both men walked, both men prayed, both men arrived somewhere true, and then they walked home together for tea. Here is what I think Tolstoy wants us to take to bed with us tonight. The holiest place you will ever stand is not in Jerusalem. It is not in any church, or temple, or shrine. It is in whatever room you are in when someone near you needs something that you are able to give. That is the hut. That is always the hut. And the only question Tolstoy ever really asked, in every story he wrote in the last 30 years of his life, is simply this: will you stop? Or will you keep walking? That's Leo Tolstoy. That's Two Old Men. That's tonight. If this story found you at the right moment, good. The stars are still out. The night is still quiet. And somewhere, in some ordinary place you will pass tomorrow, there is a hut. You'll know it when you see it. Good night.